Have you ever wondered why history played out so differently across the world? Why some societies developed massive empires and others didn't? Well, today we're going to dig into one of the most powerful and controversial answers to that very question. It all comes from the massively influential book Guns, Germs, and Steel.
And here's the thing. Our story doesn't start with some dusty academic theory. Nope. It starts with a real person in a real place asking a simple but profound question. A question that honestly gets right to the core of why our world looks the way it does today.
So picture this, it's 1972. A really sharp New Guinean politician named Yali turns to the scientist Jared Diamond and asks him this. Now, when Yali says cargo, he's talking about all the stuff, the technology, the manufactured goods, the medicine, everything that represented this huge power imbalance he was seeing. Yali was crystal clear. He knew his people were just as smart, just as capable as anyone else. So he asked, why? Why the massive difference?
And that question, it really stuck with Jared Diamond. For decades, he couldn't shake it. And his attempt to answer it? Well, that became the book Guns, Germs, and Steel. It was this massive effort to explain the huge arcs of history. But, and this is key, to do it without falling back on ugly, racist ideas about some people being better than others.
Okay, so what was his big answer? Diamond's argument was pretty radical. He said the massive inequalities we see today have almost nothing to do with people and everything to do with the places they happen to live. Basically, he argued that history is kind of a cosmic lottery. Some continents just got luckier draws.
The formal name for this is Geographic Determinism. The whole idea is that the basic building blocks for a complex society, we're talking the right kinds of plants to farm, the right kinds of animals to domesticate, even the shape of the continent itself, were just not handed out equally. It's like some teams got a 100-yard head start in a 100-yard dash.
And this right here, this chart really shows you what that luck looks like in practice. Just look at the animals. Eurasia started with 72 big mammal species that could have been domesticated. They ended up with 13 of them. Cows, pigs, horses, the whole gang. Now look at sub-Saharan Africa. 51 candidates, but 0 ended up being suitable for domestication. And the Americas? They got 1, the llama. That difference alone is just massive. It's food, it's power for plows, it's transportation, it's a total game changer.
And it wasn't just the animals, it was the very shape of the continents. Check this out. Eurasia is wide. It runs east-west. That means a crop that grows in Spain could probably grow in China, because they're at a similar latitude. Ideas, crops, animals, they could all spread like wildfire. But now look at the Americas, or Africa. They're tall. They run north-south. If you invent something in Mexico, it's really hard for it to get to, say, Peru, because you have to cross all these different climate zones. It's like a built-in barrier to innovation.
So you can see how this all created a powerful chain reaction, right? It's a feedback loop. You get good at farming, which means you have extra food, which means not everyone has to be a farmer. Your population gets bigger and denser, and that frees people up to become other things: soldiers, priests, inventors, bureaucrats. And that is where you get the technology, the guns and the steel. Oh, and you also get something else: germs. Living close to all those domesticated animals for centuries meant Eurasians were exposed to all sorts of diseases and built up immunities. Those germs would become a devastating weapon.
It's a really neat, compelling theory, right? It seems to explain so much. But there's a big but. A lot of historians and anthropologists look at this and say, hang on a second, you've left out the single most important part of the story. And what's that? Us, human beings.
And this quote really hits the nail on the head. So yeah, when the Spanish conquistador Pizarro met the Inca emperor, he had huge advantages. He had steel, he had horses, he had germs. Diamond's theory explains why he had those things. But the critique is that the theory makes the conquest sound inevitable, almost like a law of nature, something that just had to happen.
The critics say that by focusing so much on geography, the theory kinda lets people off the hook. It seems to ignore human choice, or what we call agency. It glosses over the very real, very human factors like greed, political ambition, cruelty, but also things like resistance and complex local politics. The argument is that history isn't just something that happens to people. It's something people make through the choices they make every day.
And this is maybe the most powerful critique of all. Some scholars who actually knew Yali, the man who asked the original question, say Diamond completely misunderstood him. They argue that Yali wasn't just asking, why do you have more cool stuff than we do? He was asking something much deeper, much more painful. He was asking, Why do you treat us this way? Why don't you see us as fully human? It was a question about power and dignity, not just material wealth.
And that really gets to the core of it, doesn't it? A gun doesn't choose to fire itself. Steel doesn't decide to become a sword. These are just tools. The critics argue that geography might explain why one group had the power to conquer another, but it absolutely does not explain the choice to do so. That choice is a human one.
So, where does this all leave us? We've got these two really powerful ways of seeing the past. On one side, you have the big, impersonal forces of geography. And on the other, you have the messy, complicated reality of human choices. How do we make sense of that?
Well, the key here isn't about picking a winner. It's about seeing the value in both perspectives. Look, Diamond's theory was huge because it gave us a way to talk about global inequality that wasn't based on race. That's incredibly important. But the critique is just as crucial. It reminds us that geography isn't destiny. It pulls the camera back in on the people, on their cultures, their decisions, and their morality. To really get it, you need both. You need to see how the stage was set and how the actors chose to play their parts.
You know, a good way to think about it might be with a forest analogy. Diamond's theory is like the view from a satellite. It lets you see the whole forest, the shape of the land, the major rivers, the big patterns. But his critics, they take you down to the forest floor. They show you the individual trees, the struggles for sunlight, the specific paths taken. And you can't really understand the forest without both of those views, can you?
And that brings us to one last big question to think about. We love grand theories, don't we? They make the messy, chaotic story of our past feel neat and tidy. But in a world that's so clearly shaped by both the luck of the draw and the choices we make, can one single story, no matter how clever or convincing, ever truly tell the whole tale?